Hi, everyone, and welcome to the MLOps podcast. I'm your host, Dean, and today I have with me Mila Orlovsky. Mila is an experienced leader in the medical AI space with over 16 years of experience. She was the VP of Research at Antidote Health, where she led various teams that built AI systems for providing telehealth services. Before that, she was the data science and analytics lead at Zebra Medical, which was now acquired by Nanux AI. Hopefully I'm saying the name correctly, where she worked with various modalities of imaging data to optimize dataset curation and algorithm results, and was involved in 5 FDA submissions of then novel AI-based products. Before all of that, she led the clinical BI team at one of Israel's biggest hospitals at what at the time, 2007, was a pioneering idea using EMR or electronic medical records data to draw clinical insights that improve patient outcomes and quality of care. And maybe equally importantly, she's also the co-founder of one of Israel's largest technical communities called MEDS, Medical Data Science Israel, which is currently approaching 5,000 members and has been involved in social activism for various underprivileged populations in Israel. So, hi, Mila, and thank you for taking the time to join me today.
Hi, Dean, and thank you for inviting me.
Awesome.
Very happy.
Yeah. So, maybe to start at the top, how did you get into the field of machine learning? What was your guiding path?
So it was quite a path. Initially, I started working at Ichilov Hospital, Tel Aviv Medical Center, right after graduation of my industrial engineering degree in Ben-Gurion University. And Dr. Oliver Weiss-Medig that founded this department in Ichilov Hospital, which was at the time something that was unheard of. Like, why would you use medical data to provide insights? Like, what kind of insights can you possibly provide for doctors? They already know what they're doing. They don't need extra insights. So at the time, it was pretty revolutionary, and we were struggling to make the importance of data-driven solutions for medical use cases a known and understandable thing. So I was kind of drawn into that by the fact that I was able to see immediate results. Like I was able to see the impact right away, right after showcasing the insights to the doctor and seeing the intervention that they were doing. We were able to see how it actually affected the quality of life of patient. And, I stayed there for 10 years, and there is a reason for that, because the amount of use cases was never ending. Like, I touched all of the possible use cases, from pediatrics to orthopedic to general surgery to internal care. And it was so fascinating. And by the time, a few years has passed, and terms like AI, big data, machine learning, they kind of approached the surface. And I saw that it's so fascinating. It's so interesting. And you can do much more than, standard statistical models or data analysis. And I wanted to deepen my knowledge in that. And that's how I eventually graduated my master's degree in Tel Aviv University in industrial engineering and data science, and ended up in Zebra Medical.
Interesting. So just to clarify the timeline, if anyone isn't on top of things, like when you started working in the first place, this was before sort of the deep learning revolution, right? This was before 2012. People were still machine learning was probably not as used the term, and it was still probably data science or big data. And then by the time you were moving on to Zebra, like everyone was talking about deep learning, and specifically, I think, at least the way I remember it, one of the first use cases everyone was talking about when deep learning became sort of into the general knowledge was this idea of using AI to be able to analyze medical data and things like that. Medical images, and things like that.
Yeah, actually, Zebra was the first company ever to utilize deep learning to do that. They were the first ones, and the other followed. And it was like when I was working there, and I think many people that work there felt that we are, we are in the frontier of human capabilities and utilizing something that no, nobody touched before. So it was really exciting to work there.
So, what was the sort of feeling, vibe, challenges of being in such an early place, both on the technology front and also in figuring out the application while you're figuring out the technology when you were there at Zebra?
Yeah, so there were quite a few challenges. First of all, on the technical and technological aspect and the methodological aspects, not always know exactly what we're doing and how to do this, just because like you didn't have references of prior work. So it's kind of inventing the wheel, but it's both rewarding and challenging. So once you figured out how to do it, so there's a lot of try and error in that process. But once you figured it out, it's really rewarding. And I would say the other challenge is understand the industry. So when you're working in such a novel technology or groundbreaking product, you don't always know what the industry is. I mean, is there a market? Who are the clients? Who will pay for this? And the fact that you actually have a product that you can sell eventually. So Zebra at the beginning um, had also challenges understanding and figuring out the market. And I think the other companies that came after Zebra, they already understood better, who to approach with this kind of product and the fact that there is actually a market for that kind of application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a sort of always the example is given when people talk about entrepreneurship, that in most cases you're not creating an iPhone that no one knows what it is and you need to figure out everything from scratch. You're doing like iterative improvements on things. But in your case, it sounds like you really were unlocking a new type of product, and that has very unique challenges. But now that sort of you have all of these years of experience in this field, how would you, maybe looking back or looking forward as well, how would you define sort of the main differences between the medical domain and in ML and other ML domains or applications?
Yeah. So I think before I go into the difference, let's first define what medical AI is. So medical AI is a set of applications and machine learning that is aimed to either improve patients' conditions or streamline part of the clinical processes. And the question is, why would we want to do that? So firstly, and most immediate reason is, right, we want to improve the patient's condition and quality of care. But we should not forget there are also financial applications to that. If we're looking at a healthcare system, there are two parts. There are the payers, the health insurance part that actually pay for the services that are given to the patient, and there is the provider, the clinics, the doctors, the hospitals that actually provide the medical services. And if you are getting into the health system with a complicated situation, you will probably consume more services that will cost more money to the system, and they will add burden to the system. So think about that. If you're able to prevent this kind of severe condition, that would actually obviously improve your own life, but also will lower the burden on the system and will cost less money to the system. For us as Israelis, it's pretty straightforward to think about it because we were born in Israel and every Israeli citizen is affiliated with HMO, Kupat Cholim, that are both the provider and the payer of the services. So in that aspect, they are very much interested for the white population not to get sick. Like on a population health macro scale, would want your population to be as healthy as possible because eventually the tendency is to be reimbursed based on quality of care, quality of performance, and not specifically on the quantity of care.
Mm-hmm.
US is a little behind on that, but for example, in Antidote, we worked to create this entity that is both the payer and the provider to have
Interesting.
this vector of interest to maximize the quality of care and reduce the burden of the services. like you don't want to over treat, right? So if I'm just, taking a simple example, today you want to order a CT scan. So
Mhm.
the median waiting time, both in Israel and the US, is about 2.5 months. And MRI is approaching a year waiting time. And why
Yes.
is that? Because there is like a big amount of people that are referred by doctor to do those scans. And if you
Mhm.
were able to prevent this or catch them before they deteriorate or before they need those scans, you'll be taking the burden off the system and spending less money on that.
Mhm.
So if I'm taking, and you can find every technique, every machine learning technique that can be used in medical care. And obviously, we discussed Zebra. So one of the main use cases is computer vision, and you can use it basically mostly used in pathology and radiology to interpret scans and prioritize time sensitive scans. NLP is used to either conduct summary, visit summary, because there's a lot of text that is um, absorbed in the medical processes. So there are doctors' notes and interviews and transcripts of the visits. So NLP is used to provide summaries of the visits and tag some labels in the free text. Time series is also used, especially in the intensive care units when they would want to uh, track deterioration of patients. And obviously, classical machine learning is used in the first use case that I described. When you want to predict some kind of occurrence of a specific severe condition, we would usually use EMR data, the medical record data, and use classical machine learning approaches to do that.
Mhm.
So there are countless of other use cases that I just don't want to take all the time discussing. These are like the main ones. Um, and after saying all that, let's now uh, say are the big differences between medical and the other domains.
Mhm.
So there are obviously several challenges. I would say the first one is actually, how do we scope the project as machine learning project? How do we define the research target? How do we define the target variable? And if I'm comparing medical to other domains like fraud, banking, or shopping, the
Mhm.
target variable, the actual occurrence of something, is pretty deterministic. I mean, you know that a loan was returned, right? You can track the timestamp of this, or if it's partial return, you could still track this information. If an item was purchased, you actually know that it was paid for. But in healthcare, this is not always the case.
Yeah.
And the actual occurrence of a target variable is something that is not always clear cut, conclusive, and accurate. So, if I'm taking example cancer, cancer is an evolving condition that requires several steps to identify. So, the doctor would need to use blood tests and biopsy and imaging and any other indications. And then he'll have to combine all this information and make a decision about the fact that there is a cancer. And not always the results are conclusive, and not always the results are coming in at the same time. So if I'm looking at the data today, I might not find an indication about a cancer, but if I'm looking at the data within a month, I can see an indication of cancer. So it's also a time sensitive information, and the timing of curation of your data actually makes a difference. That's one aspect of it. And the other aspect of it is understanding the clinical process of obtaining the data. So, for
Mhm.
example, in Zebra, we were working on mammography, and we were trying to identify women with breast cancer. So we would actually need to tag the data, positive, negative for breast cancer. So our data consisted of ongoing routine checkups of mammography of women. So all women that are over 40 need to do an yearly checkup on their breast, and that means that we have data of one woman and all her scans over the years. So if I'm taking two women, that one of them is positive and one of them is negative today, and I'm looking at their scans a year ago where both of them were negative, like, how am I tagging scan a year ago? Am I referring to it as positive or negative?
Yep.
So in order to make this decision, you need to really deep research how the clinical process works, how your data is obtained to make the right tagging decisions.
Yeah, I think that yesterday we had a conversation. I won't name the company because I'm not sure if they'd want to, but we had a conversation with a company that's in the medical space, and they said one of their data collection challenges is that they need clinical input from doctors on the labels, and the doctors sometimes disagree, sometimes change their minds, and sometimes change their minds given new data that comes into the system. So I think that they're, at least from my experience, and you're much more experienced at this than I am, there are very few domains in which the data is so highly variable, and the variability is not a result of mistakes. Like you can say data might change in fraud case because someone misclassified something as not fraud when it was, or vice versa. But I think that the dynamic nature of medical data is something I haven't seen in most other places. Maybe the only place that gets close to it is like doing things like autonomous driving, where you have so many edge cases and things might change definition between areas or things like that. So I think it's very, very complicated. So given the complexity of and uniqueness, I think, of the I don't know, data domain in the medical space, how do you define sort of the unique challenges that exist around data in ML, and specifically in medical ML?
Okay, so putting the for a second, putting the variability aside, there are several challenges. So first, there is actually obtaining the data, right? Let's say you identify the target variable and you understand how you create the data. You now need to actually have this data. And the fact that the complex conditions are pretty rare, the distribution is not, that very, very beautiful and nice that you can, just randomly curate the data. You often need to have a very large data set just because the rare conditions are very not prevalent, and the edge cases are actually common. So you would want to have a lot of data for that. And if you don't have solid data partners to do that, you will need to search in various sources to obtain this data. And if you need to use several sources, you have integration challenges. So, for example, if I'm working in a hospital and I want to research some kind of research problem, then I'll be using the data that I have. But maybe my hospital is a small hospital and we don't have enough traction. We don't treat enough severe cases. So we would want to partner with another hospital and get their data as well, because they are a central hospital and they are treating the severe cases that we actually need in order to present all the phenomena, right? Because you cannot develop any solid algorithm if you don't have representative data. And when I'm saying representative, I mean all the possible cases that are actually in nature regarding that, right? So if I'm developing something that is about stroke, I need to have all kind of cases that is the temporary stroke, ischemic stroke, brain bleed. So all type of similar cases that I need my algorithm to differentiate between them. That's why I need to have a representative data set. So then you have and now you need to address several sources. So you have integration challenges. And from what I experienced, sometimes different organizations store data differently. And how is that? So, for
Usual.
example, diagnosis, right? I'm counting on the doctor's diagnosis, right? What
Uh-huh.
is a diagnosis? Diagnosis is a process where a doctor sees a patient, they do some anamnesis, they question the patient about their history, their background, they document everything in the medical record. And then in the end of this process, together with the results of lab tests and other information that the doctor received, they digest everything and then they decide on a diagnosis and they code this diagnosis in the medical record. They
Uh-huh.
use catalogs that are both clinical and billing catalogs, and each diagnosis has a code and a description to it. So when I'm approaching the data, I actually see this code and I can curate the data based on the code. But what if in my hospital we also document when this diagnosis was given? So there is a difference between a diagnosis at admission and diagnosis at discharge. So when a patient is admitted to the hospital and the doctor provides a diagnosis at admission, it's an initial diagnosis that the doctor is suspecting. But
Uh-huh.
when the patient is discharged, it's a more solid diagnosis that the doctor already knows much better about the patient what is the actual diagnosis. And but the other hospital might not have this kind of granularity in the data. You will just
Yes.
see one record of diagnosis, and you will not be able to make sure that semantically it's the same data item. So also there is a lot of semantic challenges in the data, actually understanding, that you are looking at the same data item cross board and the validity of the data. So the fact that we already mentioned the fact that it's not reliable, it's sparse, it's not very consistent. And how do you validate your data? I mean, the fact that I have some kind of indication about a patient, right? Let's say I have indication that this patient have diabetes. How can I be sure that this diagnosis is correct? So I can cross
Uh-huh.
validate it with other more empirical data items like glucose results from the lab, right? I can do
Uh-huh.
some cross validation of the data to understand the reliability or use some proxy indicators to help me mitigate those gaps. And again, in order to do those mitigations and address those challenges, you really need to invest in researching how the process is actually created. I mean, how the clinical process works and how the data that you are seeing actually was obtained.
Uh-huh. That makes sense. Yeah, I'm always curious about the cases where data is being updated as you get it. Is your experience of what happens in the end is you get the data after all of the edits, or is it very common that you get like some data and then you ask for more data and you realize that a lot of the results, the outcomes were changed compared to the previous version that you had?
Of course, medical records are ever changing episodes. And in order for you to understand what data to use, you need to understand the end picture, the end goal. If you are developing something that will work real time, like you need to understand what the product is. If your product is a real time indication or real time flag, it will be using the data that you have right now and going backwards. So, in order for you to create the data correctly, you need to look at the endpoint first and then go back.
I see. Interesting. Um, and then the first time we spoke, I realized that you showered me with a lot of very interesting learnings about the business side. Like obviously, none of this is happening in a vacuum. And as you said in Zebra, for example, you needed to figure out the market side, the business side of things, as you were figuring out the technology side. So, what would you say are the main counterintuitive learnings you have on sort of the business side of AI for medicine applications?
Wow, I really love this subject. Just because it's not intuitive to me as a data person. And I'm sure that it's not intuitive for many other people in R&D. But I think in medical aspect, especially, the cost of error is a very high cost, right? If you are not developing something that is usable and correct, you will do more damage than you'll do. And so I think that when you are developing something in the medical area, you need to really understand, what is the result going to be? Who is going to use it? So if, for example, I developed an algorithm that is very accurate, very like the perfect algorithm that predicts that someone is going to have a stroke within 6 months from now. I need to ask myself, who is going to use it now? Am I going to give it to the doctors? Am I going to give it to the patient? Am I going to give it to the HMO? How are they going to use it? Are they going to do some intervention program for this patient? I mean, the fact that I'm running this algorithm and I have inference, and I now have additional 100 patients that I identified in my country that have this risk. What is going to happen next? So what is the continuation of this process? And who is going to pay for it? I mean, who has the financial interest for you to develop this kind of algorithm, right? And this is one of the important things that you need to understand before you develop it. And you can say, okay, but this is not my problem. We have product team for that, right? I mean, product, biz dev, they need to get into the details of that. And I'm saying that not necessarily, because we are the technical, the R&D people. We can also understand how to better implement something that we understand better their business side. I think one of the learnings that I also heard recently. So in Med's community that you mentioned previously, we hold monthly meetups where professionals are meeting together and sharing use cases and sharing learnings. And one of the meetups was dedicated to business aspects of medical AI. And it was so fascinating. I mean, there are use cases that I never would have imagined, and it really blew my mind. So in one of the talks, Nadav Shimoni, who is a really great health tech leader, he was giving a use case of thyroid cancer in South Korea. So what they did is they screened people. So they developed an algorithm that outputs, the likelihood of a risk of a thyroid cancer, and they screen basically everyone. So what happened? They added additional cohort of patients that are marked as a risk patient, but they didn't have any policy for those patients. So they didn't do any intervention, and nothing happened in terms of mortality and complications. So why would you develop something if it has no comprehensive approach or management on the other side? Like the health system is not managing it on the other side. So why would you even start developing something like that?
It's interesting because the way I usually explain to people how I think about the meaning of this podcast is to talk about bringing machine learning models or projects into the real world. And I think that that's like an example of what you don't want to do. Like if you want to bring it into the real world, you want it to make an impact. If you build a really great model and then it's never actually used, even if the inference happens, but the results are never actually used.
Yeah.
What is the value of that model? That's a hard question we need to ask ourselves.
I think we have a tendency of focusing on a specific part of the process. So, for example, I want to improve identification of diabetes. So let us develop solution that I'm sorry, I'm just giving, example of diabetes. It could be any other condition. So I'm sorry if someone from a product that is developing solution for diagnosing diabetes hear that, but I'm just, randomly gave an example. But if I'm concentrating too much specifically on one part of the process, then I'm missing something here. I'm missing the whole process. If I want to prevent diabetes and I want to early detect that, and I'm developing an algorithm that would provide inference about patients at risk, I also need to understand what will follow. What is the rest of the process, and how and who is going to pay for it, for my solution.
I think that to go back to your earliest point about this, I think that the main idea here is if you're the person developing the model, that model is going to be used by someone, and pulling that thread and understanding like where it leads is going to impact the way you build a model, or maybe the model you build,
Yeah.
the data you use, all of those things. So I think that that's a recurring question in many different places, but as you say, the stakes here are much higher. So I think it's more important than in other places to really understand like what's the impact that you expect your model to have versus what it's actually going to have, and how do you reconcile those two things. That's really really important. And I think one other point that's somewhat related to this is I shared this with you, but I'll share it with the audience as well. My brother is studying to be a doctor, and one of the recurring sort of conversations that I remember used to happen, I actually don't hear it as much nowadays, but was about sort of decision making versus decision support systems. So decision making means you're sort of replacing the doctor's opinion, versus decision support, where you're introducing information that helps the doctor decide. What is your? I remember that there used to be sort of this big discussion of whether or not AI is going to replace doctors, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that topic.
Yeah. So again, let's define what is decision making and decision making process is. So the doctors, they obviously have several decisions that they need to make over the clinical process. As mentioned before, first decision is diagnosing the patient. They need to digest a lot of information from their background and their current situation and their current complaint, and conclude on a diagnosis. After that, they need to make a decision regarding a treatment, right? What would be the optimal treatment for this diagnosis? They also need to do it in a timely manner when they have so many patients at the same time. And they obviously need to be accurate, and they need to be able to stand by their decision. So, but this is like, imagine ICU, right? Imagine intensive care unit when you have so many critical decisions to make, and how a human being can do that. Well, obviously they can, right? Because we have amazing doctors that do that. But what I'm saying is that we need to understand how clinical decision is made, how the doctors actually make their decisions. So I have studied this subject when I was writing my thesis, and was actually learning and studying how doctors make decisions. And there is let me read it so I don't get it wrong. There is a definition in the medical dictionary about what is a clinical decision making. A decision based on scientific observations with the skill provided by long expertise of similar cases. To this must be added the ability to make balanced judgment based on the patient's overall well-being. So what does it mean? It means that the decision making is not linear, and it's not entirely scientific, and it's not always measurable. So it means that, right, the doctor has studied many years in the medical school, so this decision is obviously based on his academical knowledge, but it's also based on his specific expertise with similar cases. But there is some point there that is also intuitive, like personal intuition. And those two aspects, they always interact together. And if we are coming into this place and we're saying, okay, we want to help you with this decision making, we need to understand what part of the decision making we're trying to solve. So obviously, there is a lot of room for automation, there is a lot of room of support, but we should not even think about replacing them, because we need to understand, where the machines are better than humans and where the humans are better than machines, and design our solutions so they maximize the relative strengths of each of those. So if I'm saying, what machines are better at, they are better in complex calculations and tedious work and repetitive work, but humans are better in deduction and conclusion making and empathy. There is also the fact that we are, as patients, who you want to be treated by. You want to be treated by a machine, or you want to be treated by a human? because there is a lot of aspect of empathy. When you're coming to the doctor, you would want them to be empathetic towards you. You would want them to ask you, how do you feel? And maybe you need this, maybe you need that. Actually, the clinical staff is also trained to, identify violence and misfeed and some other problems that patients are having, and they can also call on another professionals to help those patients. So they're also looking at the overall well-being and the mental state of the patient. Something that, I mean, obviously today there are very big advancement in technology, so you can train AI agents and machine learning to be very polite and very empathetic, but it's still not able to replace this human interaction, and I don't think it should. It just, to me, so I think the bottom line is you can build very good solutions, but you should be aware of where your technology is better than a human and where human is better than the technology, and then work on a solution that maximizes the relative strength of each one of them.
I couldn't agree more. I think that a few points that might be interesting about this is for I'm guessing most of the listeners here are like coming from some form of engineering or technological background, or if even if they haven't and it's biology and they're now working on ML, that you sort of adopt this technological mindset that technology can solve everything and things like that. But when you realize how much we don't know about medicine, then you realize that there's a really big gap between things that are, solvable by an algorithm to what we actually need to provide each and every one of us when we go to the doctor. So I think that that's sort of one aspect of this that is often overlooked. And coming in with, your ML skills, it might be easy before you start doing it to say like, oh yeah, we'll find a model that just does this. But then you realize how complicated it is. And I think that today, when people think about these things, like now in my conversations with my brother, and I think when he started out, before he knew a lot about medicine, he was really worried about whether in a few years doctors won't be needed. But now that he's like in his final year and he's already practicing and seeing how it looks in practice, he sort of, last time I spoke to him, was like, yeah, I think doctors are going to be much smarter. They'll have much access to much better tools, and they'll be able to make better decisions, but they'll probably still be necessary within the process. So I think that that's not what I expected originally myself. So I'm speaking I'm projecting here, but I think that that's very much the case today.
There is a research that was done in Tel Aviv University studying this interaction between doctors and technology, AI, machine learning, and pointing out, how doctors interact. So kind of human interaction, human automation interaction. And what is pretty clear is that doctors will have to be smart users of those systems. So doctors do need to get into technology and understand, like at least the basics of machine learning, how a model is trained. Because if you are getting some kind of result of the algorithm, you need to understand what you're seeing, how actually the system could have reached to this conclusion. So definitely doctors need to get into tech, at least at the methodological level, and understand how machine learning is working and be those smart users that utilize this out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that one question on this interaction is basically usually, and I know that this is not always true because sometimes even a doctor will say like, this is my intuition. But usually you want to get an explanation. Like as a patient, the doctor says you have something, you should take something. Then you ask them like, why? Like what did you base your decision on? And I'm curious, like explainability in ML, I think is something that's a very hard problem, no matter where you're sort of building your application. But again, here the stakes are higher, the data and the applications are more complex. How do you achieve some form of explainability for the model that you're
Definitely. So let me use very unpopular term depending on the context. But no, seriously, in this case, it's actually true. So obviously, based on what we said previously, that doctors are using multiple directions to make decisions, and when they are receiving some kind of output, an algorithm, they treat with suspect. For them, it's a black box. For them, it's something that interferes with their intuition, that interferes with their knowledge. And how do we know that it's reliable, that it's actually doing what it's doing? Um, and the fact that maybe this is a mistake. Maybe I should not treat this inference as a truth. So explainability is a key factor for acceptance of AI. So if, for example, if I'm taking again zebra as an example, if I am prioritizing a scan for the doctor, he will not be able to treat this as a given fact. Like, he would want to know, okay, where is the area that you identified as a suspicion area? How large is the bleed? Maybe if I'm marking a very large area, he would understand, yeah, it looks like something very major. Of course, he's an experienced doctor. He will be able to see it by himself, but he will want to validate our algorithm. And if we are making it as explainable as possible, for example, giving them the score, explaining them what data set we use to train the model. I know it sounds maybe not very scalable. I mean, you can't go for every patient and explain how the data set was trained. But when you are launching the product in the hospital or in the department or in the facility, you would want to provide as much explainability about how the training process was done. What is the false positive rate you should expect? Um, and then in the UI itself, you would want to add as much factors to explain to doctors how actual decision would make. And if you have a possibility to kind of give them some feedback about the validity or the strength of the power of your result, that would also be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that this is something that I've seen in a few places. I think you mentioned one thing that's pretty unique, which is there's an explainability part that happens once when you onboard the team to the system, right? And then you want to convince them that you're not you're serious, right? You trained the model on good data. They'll probably have questions about edge cases, and you'll need to explain to them like how you took those edge cases into consideration. Then you have the thing about like within the UI enabling some form of explainability, trying to give some more information like the interest areas within the image, or some sort of supporting data that you have for why this decision was made. And I think that the third thing is sort of the confidence, right? Like we I think in the ML side, maybe people take it for granted nowadays, but the ability to say like the model is this confident about this result is really powerful. And it also, at least to me, right, it maps intuitively to being humble. Like you trust people that know when they say that they made a mistake. So you're basically trusting the model because it says here I'm more sure, here I'm less sure. So you should trust me here more or less, which I think is really, it's a human thing, but I think it's really relevant for technology as well.
One thing I can add to that is that things are not, black and white. You don't develop, and then you just come to the department and you launch your product and you have explainability. These things are built on top of each other. So if you move with small cycles of development, when you have the doctors part of the design team and you have in research lab where they can play with it while it's still being developed, and they can provide you with very important feedback about how they experience it, then when you launch the product, or when you already have a product that you want to launch in the department, you will not be that surprised that you need to provide them with uh, the area and the confidence. So all of these things will come to surface before that. So I think my big learning from that is that if you want to create acceptance and explainability, you need to have the medical experts with you at all time and move in small cycles of development.
Fair enough. That's I think that's an important point for anyone building with, again, external people in mind. I'll ask one last sort of bigger question before we get to the final few faster questions. There's this thing, right, that everyone who's in the medical space definitely knows of, and also most people at this point that aren't, which is the FDA, right? And the FDA approves. Obviously, I think most people that aren't in this space connect the FDA to medicine. Like if you're taking a new drug, then you want it to be FDA approved. Most countries also sort of accept the FDA as a reference class. So the FDA is usually the highest judge or whatever you want to call it. And they're known for having a pretty rigorous and complicated process for approving things. But this process also applies to like medical device, like the things that you've built at Zebra, and I think also at Antidote and things like that. So I'm curious, like, how does the compliance side of needing to work under these requirements apply to data scientists and machine learning engineers that are working on models in this space?
So you're right. And FDA, let's first again mention what FDA is. It's a clearance from the US Food and Drug Administration that all the foods and medications and medical devices are obliged to have this clearance before they are able to market it in the US. In Europe, they have the CE market, but it's basically the same regulation market. It means that you need to validate and ensure that the device that you're developing has a specific intended use and it's safe to users. So if you are developing a device that identifies brain bleeds, it cannot identify the patient eyelid, right? Because it's just not what you have in that you mentioned that you are doing. And you obviously need to prove the confidence of your result and the accuracy of your result. So the algorithmic team and the data team have a lot of responsibility here, because when you're going through the FDA submission, you actually need to prove and kind of protect your process, your design process and your development process, the fact that you actually use representative data, that you included all the edge cases, that you tagged the data correctly, that you didn't have, like, what was your tagging policy? If I'm trying to tag brain bleed, I usually need to use 3 radiologies. And what happens if they contradict each other? How would you tag this? So they will go into your development process and understand how exactly you tag the data, how you created the data, what models did you use, and what is the output. And the fact that they are doing all this process, as you said, it's a complicated and a rigorous process, but it has a very good purpose, because they need to make sure that your product is doing exactly what it intended to do, and that it's not putting this specific patient and other patients into risk. So you also need to provide the risk analysis. So for example, if I'm producing an output about the brain bleed and I'm prioritizing a specific scan in the queue for the radiologist, I might be putting other patients into risk. If I'm pushing them down the queue, if there is some other person with a stroke, I'm pushing them down the queue. So I'm putting them into risk. And FDA is making sure that what you are putting into market does not put into unnecessary risk other patients. Important notion is that the fact that you have FDA clearance does not ensure that you have sales. So the FDA clearance just makes it possible for you to market your product, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to sell this product.
It's the entry ticket into the arena, but it does not mean that you win anything yet.
Yeah.
I think that that's super interesting. And I think that in the end, this is something that it doesn't necessarily impact the end product and what you're trying to achieve, but it really changes how you need to do things when you get there, I guess. And I think that the things that you're mentioning about like specific data distributions and proving that the data that you train and you test on have the same distribution, have the same edge cases and things like that, and also being able to prove that your not harming by, let's say, by omission, other patients is something that's really challenging and counterintuitive. So I guess if you're getting into this space and this is something that you're thinking about, maybe as a founder, maybe as a data scientist joining a team, this is, I think that these are some of the things that sort of find their way into your day to day, and you need to think about them while you're developing the models.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really like opening up your mind when you think about a little bit further than just the algorithmic and the technical aspect about false positive rate and how they will be used and how they will be perceived by your users. It's also very important steps that, product team, they are very important to understand what needs to be done, but you are the person that actually decides how it's to be done and what will be the outcome. So if you are understanding who is going to use it and what will be their experience, then you're probably able to implement it better or find better ways to output your results.
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things that you mentioned to me when we talked is that many times the feedback from the end user might be very opaque. Like you give them a version of your product, and the doctors would just say, "Oh, it's not good. Like it's spewing out a lot of garbage." But then you realize that there is sort of a fault tolerance for false positives, for example, where
Yeah.
they say like a certain amount is fine. I'm willing to live with that, as long as you never miss a real case, like there's no false negatives. But if you give me over this amount of false positives, then I'm
It's
going
just
to
not
just
worth it.
ignore your tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And sometimes in the beginning of the process, we are not aware of that threshold. We were not aware of those tolerance that they have, and this is something like one of the learnings that I personally have is um, some kind of simulation for the user to begin with. What would be the experience and what will be their acceptance threshold?
yes. So I think that that's a really good tip for people that are in the early stage of this.
I think again because it's their expertise. They are the experts, and for them, medicine is more than science. It's also their art. It's like many doctors look at this as some kind of art. And if we're interfering in that, we need to make sure that we are obviously accurate, but we're also acceptant to them.
Yes. So a few short questions to wrap this all up. Number one is sort of this field is changing a lot, and this doesn't have to be specifically for the medical ML. It could be for whatever you feel like in this space. But what are your predictions for the next year in the machine learning and AI space?
I'm going to be very original, saying that large language models are going to make a big impact on medical AI in the upcoming years, I guess. So, as I previously mentioned, there is a lot of text accumulated in the health records, and all the capabilities and chatbots are something that companies are already working to implement. AI agents that can help, educate population and help them with, instructions of how to take the medicine and follow up and data collection. So there's a lot of work that can be done both by LLMs and AI agents. And I think specifically in the Israeli landscape, we will see many mental health applications. Given the situation in Israel, I think many new ventures regarding mental health will be part of the 2024 reality.
Yeah, solemn note, but I tend to agree, and I think that their LLMs are really enabling something that we couldn't have before, which is access at a much larger scale to high quality conversations. So I think that this is I agree with that prediction. Is what I'm basically saying. So in the spirit of predictions, let's go to maybe more controversial things. Tell me something true that few people in the field of ML would agree with.
Okay, I don't know if they will agree, but maybe they are not always willing to take this step. Um, also based on what we said earlier, I'm always thinking that when you are starting to develop something in ML, especially in medical field, you first need to think about the user and the usage and how they're going to perceive it and use it. And not always on the actual technical implementation. And I know that the data people, we always want to, use the most cutting edge algorithm and be in the frontier of technology. But sometimes this is not necessary for the user. So we need to first understand what the user will need, what will benefit them, and sometimes the simplest solution can do the most work. Like you don't need something extra complicated. Sometimes you don't need a lot of data. Sometimes you just the doctor only needs you to help them with something very specific, and you can have very simple solution for that. So I think data scientists should have a wider approach and a very wide range of capabilities in their professional toolkit, so they can use any capability to address the need of the user, and not necessarily, heavy algorithmic solutions.
Fair enough. And to wrap it up, recommendations for the audience. This doesn't have to be related to data science and machine learning. Up to you.
Okay, so I have two recommendations. One is kind of semi-professional, but it's also personal. I would recommend getting up early in the morning. I do that for at least 3 times a week. I get up at 5 and I run. And it's also helpful in a professional level because many solutions or many ideas are actually born while I'm running, because there's a lot of your body and mind are kind of doing cleansing, and you are completely free to think about new ideas. So it's although it's personal, but to me it's also professional because I get a lot of ideas done, and then you also feel like all day is ahead of you, and you get a lot of things done when you get up early.
Commendable recommendation.
And the other recommendation is to have a community of professional around you. I think that was one of the things that motivated me and the other co-founders of Meds. We are 4 women that co-founded Meds a year and a half ago. And as you mentioned, we are approaching 5,000 people. And this is a community that is mostly comprised of data scientists, but they're also products and managers and entrepreneurs. So for me, being part of a community is very important because sometimes you struggle with so many challenges professionally and sometimes team wise. But the fact that you can always ask someone for an advice or have a second opinion and collaborate, this is something that I think will make you a better professional.
Fair enough. I think those are great recommendations. I recommend if you have the opportunity to join Mila's community Meds in Israel, then you should. I'll add the link also in the description if people want to come in and join. So I think that's it for today. Mila, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing a bunch of your knowledge, a tiny bit of your knowledge, I guess, on the subject. And I'm looking forward to having you on again.
Thank you very much, Dean. And thanks everyone
Thanks,
for
everyone.
listening.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the MLOps podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please like the video or subscribe. If you have any feedback, leave a comment below. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.